Welcome to Primetime, a show for adults in the prime of life. I'm Susan Hoskins, the Executive Director of the Princeton Senior Resource Center. We do programs and services for older adults and their family caregivers. Today our topic is caregiving, and particularly men as caregivers. My guest is Reverend Peter Stimpson. You're the Executive Director of Trinity Counseling Service. Welcome.
Why? And I'm your neighbor right across the street.
That's right. So why don't you first tell us a little bit about what kinds of services Trinity Counseling offers, and specifically for caregivers.
Trinity Counseling Service has 23 psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, and those with a master's degree in counseling have gotten their license, practical counseling license, and they provide primarily counseling for depression, stress, marital issues, family issues. 1/4 of those who come are children. And we have
minor children, under 18 children.
Under 18 children, yes. What we've done in this area is we started in 2010 a program on bereavement and caregiving. I had someone who was very close to me who, when his wife died, almost fell off the earth and just had a horrible time coping. And so we had a bereavement program created, but I also wanted to expand it to be a caregiving program because of the effects that it has on the caregiver. All too often, when you're a caregiver, people will stop you and say, you know, how is your aged parent, or how is your ill spouse? They never quite ask for you. And so I knew that there would be a need for something like that. I knew it because of my own personal experience.
Right. You have personal experience, not only professional experience as a caregiver.
Yeah, I was, my wife, of 30 years, who died in 2004, was sick for 21 years.
Wow.
It was determined due to a gene that was activated and started to have her body attack its own liver that she would need a liver transplant. It was months of testing to determine whether that would be possible and where she would be placed on the list. There was 2/3 chance that she would not get it and die, 1/3 chance that she would get it and have a horrible recovery. She did get it in 2001. We had about 2 good years, and then the body started to reject the organ, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. There were many years where there was absolutely no vacations for us. We had a TV on we had a upstairs and downstairs, and there was a TV on the upstairs level that I bought, a big one, so that she could go basically from one bedroom, that was our bedroom, into a living room upstairs where she could watch television and just relax. Stairs were very difficult for her. And then, as caregivers know of someone who has a long chronic illness, I find that people kind of, their health drops, and then they kind of hit a plateau, and that goes for a while, and then it drops again until finally death comes. And this was a insidiously slow process of 21 years. And I remember when we went to Albert Einstein Hospital in Philadelphia to do the testing and to get her on the list. I walked, you know, straight up, a smile on my face, kind of a spring in my step. After the transplant, she walked in straight up, spring in her step, a smile, and I walked bent over like this. We'd go for an appointment, and I would fall asleep in the chair. And the process when she died, which went from like early August through early October, or most of the time she was in intensive care on a ventilator. We had decided to move into a new house. She had wanted a house that would be on one floor. So I moved into Wellington Manor, which is in between Lawrenceville and Pennington. And 2 weeks before she died, the house was ready. And so I moved us in 2 weeks before she died. And I arranged for a major pickup of multiple bags of the packing that would go inside of boxes. Something like 68 bags I had. And as here I am in the new neighborhood, and I'm bringing them out one night back and forth and back and forth, and all of a sudden my pants fell off, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I've just mooned the neighbors. I go inside, and I weighed myself, and I had lost 20 pounds.
Wow.
And did not even know it. And I was conscious. I mean, I tried very hard to force myself to eat. But for some reason, my focus was not on me at all. It was always on her. And I never complained. It was something I just knew how to be done. And some of the caregiving was horrendous. After the transplant, they opened the rib cage to reach the liver. It's an 8.5-hour operation. And when she was back in her room, I learned that they had broken a rib, and the rib had punctured a lung. And so she had to sit up for 3 months after this major of major operations. And before she was allowed to come home, there was a tube that came from her liver. They called it a T-tube, and there was a bag at the end, and they would sort of watch what the liver was then producing to see whether it was producing enough. And when they were confident that it did, then they would cap this tube, but leave it in for 3 months so they could go back in and look. Well, when they did this, they pulled on the tube inadvertently, and she began to leak bile inside of her body. And she was complaining the next day that she was in intense pain, and they were saying, oh, you're just being a baby, it'll be okay, until she was leaking bile through the staples, which were extensive on her stomach and side. And then they said, here's your options. We can operate again, in which case we think your wife will die, or you can agree to empty the bag every 2 hours for the next 2 months, which meant no sleep. And of course, I opted for the safer course. And so the thing, I guess, that I can think of in terms of caregiving is that the caregiver has a tendency, depending upon, I suppose, the closeness to the person, but to devote themselves so fully to the person who's ill that they neglect their own care.
Right.
And I would leave the hospital, and I'd then have to call our children, I'd have to call relatives to give a daily report on how things were going. Many people in our culture who don't want to think in terms of death don't want to come down to visit. Her brother said, I'd rather remember her as a little girl. I don't want to see her dying in bed. I didn't respond well to that. But I mean,
it's just describing is that there are a lot of challenges in being a caregiver. It's a hard job.
It's a very hard job.
One of the things I talk with caregivers about that I see, and I work mostly with caregivers of older adults, either adult children or spouses, but a phenomenon I call caregiver creep, where you start out doing little things, but as the illness or the time progresses, it grows and grows. And so, for example, you start out helping someone make the grocery list, and then you find yourself helping to make the grocery list and driving the person to the grocery store. And then you're making the grocery list, driving to the store, and pushing the cart around. And then you add on putting things away. And then you fall apart and you go, why am I making such a big deal out of just putting the groceries away? But it's the accumulation, it's the additive piece, and each time one of those options come up, as a devoted caregiver, you tend to say yes, I'll take that on, yes, I'll take that on. But a common characteristic is that caregivers neglect themselves. I've also heard from caregivers that one of the things that they resent is people saying to them, oh, you really ought to take care of yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I had a list of sayings that I didn't like to hear from other people. It's like, take care of yourself, but I'm not going to help you. Or I mean, they wouldn't say the I wouldn't help you part, but, and here I am a priest, and people would say to me, we'll be praying for you. And I would say, well, that's sweet, but I'd rather you bring a casserole over to the house or come to visit us in the hospital. Maybe have me over to your house for dinner. Something that would really help me.
Or call us when she feels better.
Yeah.
Instead of, can we take you out, or can we cover for you and let you go to a movie for a couple of hours?
Yeah, exactly. That would have been great.
Yeah.
And there were many people who were very nice. But when it's a 21-year process, it's just mind-boggling. And people sometimes rationalize by saying, well, he's gotten used to it. Well, no, he didn't get used to it. He wouldn't complain. Therefore, if I'm not complaining, I guess I'm doing fine. No, it's just that if you love somebody, you automatically step into that role.
One of the things that, again, in my work with caregivers is helping people change their thinking some. That they think that in order to be a good spouse, I need to do everything. And instead saying maybe one of the best things you can do, maybe one of the best ways that you can be a caregiver right now is to get some help for a couple of hours a day. Or get somebody to do that during the night bag unloading so that you can get sleep, because then you will be a better caregiver. The worst thing that can happen for her is if you crash and burn.
Well, you're right. I mean, I remember going, as she got sicker and sicker, to GNC and getting like a packet of vitamins that I would take every day, saying to myself, if I go down, we're in real trouble, because we have a lot of friends, but family is like 5-hour distance away, and it's very hard for them to help. And yes, I mean, and sometimes the caregiver is so consumed, I think, in taking care of the person who's ill that your mind doesn't even think about, oh, yeah, I wonder whether someone would help me by doing this or that. But I know what you mean. I think that some spouses want to do it all, and I think the person who's ill wants their spouse to do it all and doesn't want someone else to come into the house. And sometimes the spouse feels like, you know, I've failed as your spouse if we have to have help. Not thinking that if you don't get help, the whole system could crash. I think of this friend who's a priest, and he was like 80 years old, and his wife went in to have a knee replacement, and she was highly diabetic, and everyone begged her not to do it, but she found a doctor who would operate. And she ended up, nothing went well. She ended up in the hospital with an infection, then she had a stroke, then she had a heart attack. And he was coming in every day and spending most of the day in the hospital until one day I went to the hospital to visit, and he wasn't there. And he had passed out, fallen back, hit his head on the floor of the intensive care unit, and was taken by ambulance to another hospital that specialized in head trauma. And everything came crashing to a halt then. Then other family that weren't coming forward then had to come forward. And I think too that probably friends can be almost sometimes more helpful than family, because family have a hard time accepting the fact that my mother My wife, it's hard to see the person dying right in front of your eyes. When my wife was finally dying, I mean, the kids came into the room, some of whom hadn't seen her in a while, and they would burst into tears immediately. Her skin was yellow, her eyes were orange. She was demented because of the liver not processing toxins and those attacking the brain. And I think that probably that's where I think the services like that you provide at the Princeton Resource Center are so vital, so that if someone were to call you and say, I'm drowning as a caregiver, I don't know what to do, and you can put them in contact with the fact that you have support groups for them. You can put them in contact with what services might there be available for a respite so that they could have an evening or a day off. And, you know, I think that it's programs like this one where we're talking to one another that make people aware that those things exist and make people aware of the fact that it's not a failure as a relative to ask for help. I can remember when my mother fell and broke her hip and then had she had an aneurysm on her aorta, and she passed out when it leaked, and they had to repair that, which they didn't think she'd even live through. But then they were waiting for another operation to then repair the broken hip. And my sister and I had a talk, and my sister said, you need to quit your job and come home and take care of Mom. And I had a family. I said, you know, I can't. And I said, she's going to need 24-hour-a-day care, and even if I was home, you and I can't handle it. Mm-hmm. And so we need to put her into a facility that will give 24-hour care until she improves to the level where she comes home, and then maybe we can arrange something. Well, my sister thought I was this terrible person. But, you know, if we burned out, what good would that do Mom?
And when you're both a parent of children, or you have your own family, and trying to take care of older parents, you're caught in the middle. You're that sandwich generation.
Right.
I think one of the things that I'm finding is that so many people of a certain age, of our age, are finding themselves as they begin to consider retirement or getting to the point where their own children are raised, now taking care of parents and going, you know, I didn't envision that my retirement was going to be caregiving, but that's the reality. I think one of the things I want people to understand from this time is that, first of all, caregiving can cover a wide range of activities. It might be that you just pick up groceries for your next door neighbor every Saturday when you go to the grocery store. It might be that you sit down and have a cup of tea with somebody a couple times a week, giving the family a break, or visiting someone who doesn't have visitors. Or you might be doing the kinds of full personal care that you were just describing, where a person needs someone in attendance 24/7, help them with toileting, help them with bathing, make sure that they eat, take care of all the medical things. But there's a whole range of activities, all of which are included in caregiving. And the second thing is that there are resources available, that you can call the Princeton Senior Resource Center and we'll connect you with the resources that you need in the community for support groups, for counseling. Your office provides some terrific counseling for people who are in caregiving and in bereavement. Services like Meals on Wheels, respite care, we can connect families with all of those services, whether you live in this area or somewhere at a distance. And we're both involved in a conference that's coming up in January of 2011. The YWCA and Trinity Counnseling and the Princeton Senior Resource Center and Tina Cahill are offering a conference for caregivers called Nurturing the Nurturer. And Tina will be the keynote speaker. It's on January 15th, and I'll put the information up at the end of the show. The registration is through the YWCA of Princeton, if you're interested in that. It's a free conference. There's a keynote speaker and then workshops. And part of what we also want to do, there's so many things about caregiving that can seem overwhelming. And I think this conference also wants to look at the joys of caregiving, the gift that you're given of caregiving. Can you talk anything about
I can certainly
that from
talk
your own
about
personal
that.
experience?
I'll give you a couple of. But the one thing I'm thinking of is that I've seen a number of people flee when they see their spouse that ill, and yet by staying, there was like a quantum leap, I think, in my growth as an individual and my understanding. I wrote an article once called "Lessons Learned While Dying," and but the caregiving helped me grow as a person and made me realize, the small stuff is small, and therefore not to be too upset by it. But also to realize that caregivers need help. And it was my experience that then made me want to create a program to take care of people, to give them help that I did not get, to give them a counselor that I did not have, to help them through this process.
Someplace where you could just go and say, I had a horrible day today, or this is what I'm feeling, this is how torn I'm feeling about wanting to be a good son or daughter and at the same time feeling overwhelmed. So having someone you can talk to, whether it's a friend or a professional, is a critical component of successful caregiving.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I've been blessed enough to remarry, and my wife Lauren, her mother is approaching the age of 90, lives in Richmond, Virginia, and had a fall recently where she ended up blind in one eye. And the stress of living far away, wanting to go down and spend a lot of time, but unable to because of having a job. So traveling back and forth as often as she can. And the ride itself from here to Richmond, which is like 7 hours or 6 hours, is taxing enough. And feeling guilty, if you don't do something. The relative who is present feeling like it's all on me and being a little upset. There's so many dynamics, but I think that for me, not that I would wish this kind of thing on anybody, but I grew so much closer to my wife by caring for her for so long. When she died, it was like a part of my soul was going into the grave with her. But I evolved as a person because of that caregiving, and I knew then how to help other people in a better way.
I think I would say the same thing, that caregiving for my in-laws really helped me to understand better what full-time family caregivers were going through, and helped me to be more patient, more resourceful, and all kinds of things for the people I work with. But it also was such a different world for me. I'm usually multitasking, doing a dozen things at once, working a 10 or 12-hour day, and to just gear down to their pace was a whole new experience. To sit on the couch for an hour and look at old family photographs was a gift to me. To know my mother-in-law better, to share that with her.
Sure.
So I think that there are those gifts, as you say, of
I think, too, that men in our culture are seen as having a harder time being a caregiver, that it's really women that do that. And yet there are many men who do it, and do it out of love. I think at first maybe they're more comfortable doing things like going to get the groceries or bringing someone to a doctor's appointment. But to take care of toilet duties for your mother is hard.
It is.
And it's sort of a total role reversal, and yet you have to do it. And men, I think, will step up to the plate when the time comes. But our culture is such that we see women as nurturers and men as breadwinners or whatever, which is not anymore the case at all. And so we have to break through that myth to realize that no, men are just as capable of showing loving caregiving as a woman is.
One of the things we are finding is more men stepping forward as caregivers. I think, again, it may be a different generation, but men who were expected to spend more time taking care of their children are also more able to step forward. But I think you're pointing out another interesting thing, and that is the tasks that go into caregiving. Grocery shop, okay, I'll do the grocery shopping, I'll do the laundry, and the emotional support.
Right.
And caregivers needing to find the resources to do both of those things in their caregiving. So do you think that, we wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between men and women as caregivers. Do you think that's emotional connection is more of a stretch for men, or?
Yeah, I think so, because we're trained, at least I was, to not express emotions. Anger is okay, laughter is okay, but tears, no.
Right.
And when you get, your mother who is upset and crying, and you don't know quite how to deal with that, that's hard for a man, but I think a man can do it. And I remember myself, I brought the children down to see my wife before she died, and I was living in an apartment before we moved into this house I told you about. And when they were all gone, and it was just my little Bichon and me, I fell apart. I mean, I started to cry, and I was uncomfortable crying because men don't cry. And I finally was smart enough to say, Peter, it's okay, let it go. And, so I wept. Bichon kind of looked like, I don't know what to do to help you, but, and then I gave myself permission every day after that if I felt like I needed to cry a little bit, to let it go. And often I do that in the car back and forth to Philadelphia or something, but it felt as if that was also healing me and enabling me to be more expressive of my feelings, and also to be more attentive to hers.
That's great. Well, Peter, thank you so much for coming and
No,
having
thank you
this
for having me.
conversation about caregiving. I think both of us want very much for people to look for the resources that are out there, to get help. Don't just tough it out as a family caregiver. Look for the respite care that you can get, the support groups that you can get, and there's a growing amount of information on the internet
Right.
for caregiver resources, including some online caregiver support groups, because I know that some caregivers just can't leave the home to get out and meet with other people. But thank you so much for sharing your personal experience. I hope people will join us at the conference at the Y on January 15th.
Thank you, Susan.